All right, so I'm going to work again on the housing TRO, the same one that we did in the last recording. Made some changes to the assembly line wizard to make it a little bit better. One of the big changes is that now we'll kind of put a placeholder document in there that's missing the signature line, so we can show our user a preview of the form before they sign it, which I think is going to be a really helpful feature for us. So let me get started with that. Now we have, if you tuned in earlier, you'll see what we had as far as the form. We made some changes as we were working. I won't need to do that today because it's already in pretty good shape. The changes we made last time are still there. So let me just pull up the link to the installed version of the interview generator, which we have here on our Trello board. This got added a little bit here. All right, so eventually it would be nice if this interview generator actually will upload things to the right place, which should be a pretty easy feature for us to add in actually. So I'm redoing some of the things I already did before, but that's okay. And I think we should keep this short. And there's really just three categories of things we can do. So it's not fixing bad conditions. Your utilities are shut off, or your landlord is doing something else to breach your right to quiet enjoyment. That's not the best plain language, but it's a good placeholder. This form is best used in the housing court. It's a housing form. That name is great, and this is the same thing I did last time. I had to keep going back in to get the link to the form. We don't actually use that yet, but I think it's still going to be a helpful thing. So let me open that up. All right. Let's go to this one more time. Here's the link to the original form. This time I feel like the wizard itself is ready, so we're gonna go through this and put in the right detail. So on this form, the tenant is usually the plaintiff. We still have this Court County form field that we're not doing anything with yet. We'll just leave that as is. Which is fine. We're going to have to do that manually. When your landlord when did it happen? I think maybe we're doing right here is we're going through all the fields on the form and we're labeling them appropriately. We're giving them a description that the person who runs the interview will actually be able to see, that is. So, other breach of quiet enjoyment. Again, not the best plain language term, but it's okay for now. Describe. This is going to be a short field. It would be nice if it were a text area, but they actually only have like one little box to put information in. This is going to be currency. Okay, this actually is not currency. It's just regular text. The cost is currency. We're going to have to put some explanation on the screen about why we're asking for the landlord. Okay, so let's see. This is really saying, don't allow the landlord to let me back into the apartment, is what we're saying. Provide me utilities. Stop breaching my quiet enjoyment. And then the phone number appears twice, so this is going to be just kind of a manual fill-in thing here. We're going to leave that alone. We're not going to ever let the user fill in those two fields. We're going to handle those in code. All right, so let's see. The first thing would be your landlord's actions. So something like this. This form. Did or failed to do. Please give us some information about what your landlord did. How did this harm you? And we're going to delete this. We're not going to use this sub-question at all. Well, actually, I'll leave it in. Be specific about up to 3 expenses you had because of your landlord's actions or failure to act. Your landlord is liable for 3 times your monthly rent or the actual expenses you, I should say this, change this to may be liable. Of your landlord's actions or failure to act. court should give you whichever amount is larger. What are you asking the court to do? You can select any of the below actions. Now, these fields are kind of like leftovers that we don't actually want the interview to prompt the user about at all. So we're going to leave those as is. Now we have our interview. I'm going to save this onto my desktop. I'm going to upload it here to my playground. I said desktop, but actually went into my downloads folder. Now I have previously uploaded. Okay, so there's one thing I have to add in. Let's do that first. In this basic questions file, I don't have this basic question signature flow defined, so let me just do that. Just put a placeholder for that right now. And I'm going to actually install this so it's available to my interview. Okay, so it doesn't do anything yet, really. We can go back in and add that functionality later. And we already have an idea of how that will work, and most of the code written, we just have to tie it together. Now I'm going to install this. I just put it to GitHub. Now I have to actually install it. Okay, so once that's done, let me just wait till that's done actually. All right, now I should be able to run this. And let's just see how the draft looks. You get a sense of what you get out of the form out of the gate. So we have this placeholder that we just added, which is going to appear on all of our interviews at least once. If they have 5 forms they're filling out at once, they won't see this for each of the 5 forms. They'll just see it one time. Then they see the second placeholder screen. We use the information that we filled in, the title and the description of the form. Okay, so when did this happen? Let's say it happened yesterday. So these we're going to want to show and hide depending on whether someone checked the box above, right? We don't want that to always appear, because this is context for explaining the utilities were shut off. My electricity was cut off. And other breach of quiet enjoyment. Let's say they are allowing noisy construction all night long. Now, normally we don't want to see all 3 of these expenses. We want to make these optional. Let's see. I'd throw in my food. Let's say I lost a day of wages. And not sure what else would happen here. Other breach of quiet enjoyment could be almost anything. So let's say maybe there was a sewage backup in the basement. I didn't say what that was. I just said noise. So let me say something more specific. I had to buy some earplugs. That'll be like $25. So what we would want here is to do some math and figure out if this is more than 3 times that person's monthly rent. In Boston, definitely not. So we need a new question that we have to add in that asks for the person's rent. Here we want this to do some calculation for us to calculate 3 times those 3 times the rent and the amount that's it's just adding up those 3 expenses we had. This should be currency. I don't remember why I didn't choose that in the original thing. Okay, these are our placeholder screens that we're going to get rid of. We don't really need a docket number, but this is still asking for us for one. So I'm going to get rid of that question. Okay, defendants.priority isn't defined. Let's add that in. So this is something we did intentionally. I'm asking for the person's personal information at the end of the form once they can see the value of it. Let's put in the address of my old work. Okay, so we have this asking for other party, which is the landlord. We'd want to customize this screen here to have it specifically say the landlord's name. It's the address of Suffolk. So we need their phone number and email. I think we have to make these optional, right? We don't want to necessarily require their phone number. We can default that to being today. We haven't done that yet. Now we're asking for the court. Here, we can recommend that they file in the housing court, which is the best choice for them in most cases, and we can figure out which housing court applies to them. This would be the Eastern Housing Court, based on the address I gave. Plaintiff is the same as the other party, or it's the same as the tenant. We shouldn't really need to ask for this twice. Okay, now we get the signature. This should be asking us for that preview first, so let's see if we can figure out why it's doing that. Interesting. Okay, so something must be wrong with this. Or maybe I hadn't installed the version that added the signature. Well, that's unfortunate. I tested that on a different form and it worked, but it didn't yet. But that's okay. We can edit that manually. And I'm going to go back and fix that in the main form later. So it's asking me to sign before I see the preview of what I'm signing, which is a little silly. You can see that all of our information went right into the form in the right place, which is great. Oh, it does have a place for a docket number. All right, we don't want that on this form. We're going to make that optional. And here we can download our actual form that's filled out. Let me see if I can make that visible to you. So let's scroll through it and see what it has. Okay, there you go. Okay, so it didn't put in the name of the defendant because I made that an empty field. Everything else looks pretty good. So I don't remember why these were not turned into fields in the checkbox fields. But we'll have to look into that. And our signature made it here in the verification, but not up above. And I don't know why that happened either. And we need to print their name here in this field. Oh, which we know. We knew already why that wasn't done. Okay. That might be something we overrode somewhere. But this looks pretty good. It's a really good start. All right. Let's go back in and change those things that we noticed right away. So first, let's get rid of that signature prompt in the preview version of the form. So this is the attachment block we're going to right here. We don't want the preview to show the person's signature. Now, let's see. I think, had done some changes here to automatically set those user phone 2, etc. to being an empty string, which we don't want. In the basic questions file, I think we did that. We want to get rid of that. I don't remember why I did that. We want to have the person actually handle that in the interview. So we had the phone number 2 handled correctly. We're going to move that code out of this and into our actual interview. Something that eventually we don't want someone to have to do, but that will require some changes to our interview generator. Okay. What else did we have? I noticed we didn't have the currency on the... We're going to add in another screen. Let's do that first. Let's just write a new screen here. We'll put it in this order. Okay, right before this question here. How much is your rent? The amount your landlord owes you depends on how much your monthly rent is. Amount. We want to make sure that once we've added it here, we want to put it into our logic flow so that it appears in the right place in the interview. So let's go down to that section of the interview file. So that comes right here. Let's see if we can find it. Here we go. It's marked with this ID, and there's a little comment built into that code block that says what it's for, which is it's the interview generated default logic flow. So after we ask for the last item, we're going to want to ask for how much the rent is. And then on this landlord liable amount screen, let's do a little calculation. Doesn't really matter where in the file the questions go, by the way. They can go in whatever order you like. But let's kind of group these a little bit. Okay, so we're going to make a new code block that does the math for us. So 3 times rent equals tenant monthly rent times 3. Simple enough. The next calculation we need to do is the amount of each expense they had, right? So we don't know if they're going to have 3 expenses, but we assume they might not even have 1 expense, to be honest. They might not be able to calculate that. So here, we're going to want to let them leave these blank. So let's actually do that here. We have to give this screen a label, so we always ask it, even if they don't fill anything out in that screen. Ask about expenses. We're going to give that name. Okay, so the way that Docassemble works, it's usually best to set something to a temporary variable if you're going to work on it on multiple lines of a code block. So let's create a new temporary variable. So we're going to call it like temp. Let's see, temp expense total is going to be set to 0 at the beginning. So, and then we're going to go through a series of if statements. So if we defined incident item 1 cost, temp expense total plus equal, and we're going to basically just do the same thing 3 times, changing the 1 to 2, and a 3. Pretty basic math. Then we're going to have expense total equal to the temporary value. In this specific interview, that isn't technically needed, but it's a good habit to have, to always, when you're building a variable through multiple lines in a code block, to always have it use a temporary value to hold that first. Now there's one more thing we want to calculate for this, which is which number is bigger, right? So call it largest liable guess is equal to 3 times rent if 3 times rent is greater than expense total, else expense total. Okay. Now let's go back up to that screen where we said how much is the landlord liable for. We want it to be default. The amount that we guessed was the biggest number. We want this to be data type currency as well. Let's see. And let's give a little bit of reflecting back to the user here too. You already told us that you had expenses totaling let's save so we can see that on the right here. What did we call it? Total expense total. And we're going to wrap that in the currency function so it shows the dollar sign and it automatically gives it 2 decimal points. And that your rent is we call the tenant rent amount, I believe. Again, wrapping in that currency function. Now we're going to use an if statement. So if, what do we call it? I think landlord liable amount. Oh, that's not the right thing at all. We called it largest liable guess. Right. Equals, let's say if it's greater than expense total. It's a good habit to use this over here so that you avoid typos in variable names, but you don't need to. You can always you can see sometimes I'm copying and pasting, sometimes I'm writing it out. Just depends, whatever is simplest for you to remember. So we defaulted to that number. So either that's bigger, only one of these can be bigger. So we don't have to have any other conditions besides if and else. Okay, let's try it with those tweaks we just made. I don't really care about having these be realistic right now, so let's say the first expense was A, expenses A, B, and C. And the total was, say, $100, $50, and $25. So that will be $175 of total expenses, prompting us for our rent amount, which is good. And let's say our rent was $1,500 a month. Okay, so this default did not work. So let's see if we can figure that out, why it didn't. See. And let's try something. We should be able to put a dollar amount in here. Oh, I remember. I know why. Of course. I forgot. This should also have Mako tags around it. Just like you do to insert a variable into the question text, you have to surround it with those brackets and the dollar sign. Okay, so now we have $4,500 there as the default. Okay, this is good. So now let's take care of this Cork County variable. So we actually, in the background, put court county into a variable called courts 0 dot county. That address dot county. So that's something that we should handle in the interview generator or in our basic questions file, but we don't do that right now. So here's the patch that I'm doing to get that to work, basically. If we save and reload, we already took care of user phone 2 and user full name 3, so we shouldn't be prompted for that anymore. Okay. Right. When there's a code block and there is a question that define the same thing, Docassemble defaults to showing you the question. So let's get rid of this line, but it should still work. Okay, now this is interesting. We already had a place where we're trying to, we got the court to be filled in. I think maybe we just have to change the order of these fields. It must ask for the court county. Okay, we don't really want the docket number. We want that to be left out. Because no one's going to know their docket number before they file it. That's really a field for the court to fill in on this particular form. We do care about their name. Let's set the plaintiff name. Let's do this other thing here. Okay, set party assignment. So we know the defendant, we know the landlord, we know all those things. So we're gonna just comment out these. So sometimes you have to actually make that in a mandatory block, which is what we have here. And we're gonna want to ask that question a different way here as well. So plaintiff equal users 0. It's one option we have. And we want to trigger this block to run. So we're referencing the variable here, and then we have to define it in this code block. So I like to just set that to true at the end. Trying to think through what else we need to set. So the defendant's going to be the landlord. That was a list. So we're going to set defendant 0 to the... This is the kind of thing that we can do, by the way. That's why we asked that question, who's normally the plaintiff, who's normally the defendant. So we could avoid having to write this code manually, but for now, this is the best we have here. So we're going to set the defendant's first item in the defendant list to being other parties 0. We want that list to be gathered. Okay. I think rather than asking who is the first of the other parties, we're going to say, who's your landlord? That just makes more sense. That might even be one of our very first questions. So let's write that question out. Now, a landlord could either be a person, or it could be an organization, a business, an LLC. I think it's nice to let them enter the name two different ways depending on what kind of organization their landlord is. Is an individual. Landlord is individual. Individual. Just checking the typing. It's going to be a yes/no question. Now we're going to ask if the landlord, what the landlord's name is. Okay, so that's going to go into the other parties. First of our other parties. We want to have possibly ask for other parties last name as well. Let's see. And we want to have a different version of just the first name if it's a business. I think I'm going to change this phrasing here.
Are you live streaming?
I am. Yeah, it's okay now. Change it to landlord type. And we're going to use radio buttons here. And there are going to be two choices. Business and individual. Business, or government, or organization. And what I'm doing here with that colon and then putting something on the right is I'm going to be able to refer to this short name, and I can tweak the wording of this to my heart's content without having to change any of the logic that's lower in the screen. And I can translate it as well. Okay, so we're going to have the first version here be first name. Okay, and the other one is like name of organization or business. This version is going to show if the landlord type is individual. I don't think this needs to be in quotes, but let's put it in quotes anyway. This version is going to show if, same with the last name, so let's actually change the order here. Figure out when to put things in quotes, when to put them in Mako tags. That can be tricky, but it just becomes something you remember over time. Okay, so now we have a syntax error. Let's just see if we can find it before we run it. Oh, of course. We had show if here. But we didn't have a question that goes with it. Oh, I deleted the part that asked for the person's last name. that happened. I guess when I was moving it down here, well, that's when it happened. Okay, so let's see if we get rid of that syntax error. Great. So this is a more specific version of that other party's name. We want to ask it earlier than we were asking it here. That's really a question that makes more sense to happen at the beginning, or close to the beginning. We don't need all of their contact information, though. That can be kind of tiresome, and someone might not actually know that information. So let's ask for it here before we ask for the amount that we think they're due. Then we can also use that information on that same screen. So we're going to try to get that person's name. We only care about the first name. You know, a business has one part for their name, really, right? You don't think first, middle, and last for a business, because it could be something else. It could have any number of parts to their name. But we can store it all in the first name field. Now, when we say, how much is the landlord liable for, let's actually reflect back that person's name. Let's run it again with those changes. I think it's a little bit better already. Let's kind of speed through these. We want to go back and change this. We can't forget that, hiding those expenses. By the way, it'll stop me from entering wrong information there. That's a nice thing about having that be set to currency as well. Let's say it's $2,000, went up. This is already a little bit nicer, isn't it? Now, this I want to make a little bit nicer. I want to say, what is your address, right? That's something we can change in our basic questions file, so it's nicer for everybody. Let me show you how I would do it anyway, though. Again, it doesn't really matter where you put this, but let's kind of put it over here, I guess. We don't need a sub-question here. It's kind of obvious what we need to put in. We don't want to make their middle name required. To be honest, we probably shouldn't make their last name required either. We do want to tell them to put in their full name, though. Some people don't have a last name, that's why I'm saying that, but we don't want them to think they can just put in their first name if they have a last name. Put in your full legal name. Some people have a suffix like junior, senior. That's a significant part of their name, so let's let them do that here. think so. There's a built-in function in Docassemble that will just put in the suffixes translated. And I think it's just called suffixes. Might be called something like name suffix. Let's look it up in the documentation. That's called name suffix. That is exactly what it is. Is it plural or singular? Plural. Okay. Now, this is a more specific version of that question than the other one we had. We put a syntax error in there. Let's see if we can find it before we run it. I might want this to be indented like that. Might not like the brackets. It's not the problem. Let's see if we can find it before we, let's see. That looks good. Well, let's run it and see what it says. Oh, I think I just need to have it say it's code rather than just choices. Some places Docassemble will let you assume it's code, and some it requires you to say it's code. Okay, so now we're going to start over from the beginning. So let's go ahead and fix the other things we noticed, which were that those shouldn't be requiring those descriptions. Okay, so this should be an optional one. And if they haven't checked that box, we don't even want to show it, right? So show if. This is a shortcut version of show if where we're just assuming it's a true false. You don't have to write variable name and then is. Same with this one. Okay, so that should be a better experience for those two questions. Now we get explanation only if they check that box. Get the breach of quiet enjoyment question only if they check that box. These expenses should also be optional, but they're not right now. So let's go ahead and see if our other changes worked. Why does it say here? It's asking for the suffix, but it's not showing those choices we had. Well, let's look at the example. I'm trying to think about what I did wrong here. Didn't show us any choices for some reason. Is it running the version of this question that I thought it was? Let's see. No. Where did that question come from? I think I must have had that in my basic questions file where I don't really want it. Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, so it's pulling it from here, which is actually fine. We just want to copy that change that we had here to show the suffix and make sure it's not required. into this question library here as well. So that way it's used for all the interviews. It's really a better version of the question, and we can translate it and make it nicer to use. So now I'm going to go back here, close these. I'm going to install this so it's available for everybody on the server. I'm not going to push it to GitHub yet because I know we'll make other changes. I'm just going to install it. Okay, now when we reload, we should get a little drop-down menu here instead. Not yet. Sometimes when you reload a screen and a change is made in a different file than the one that you are reloading, you have to force it to refresh. So let's see, it looks like it's waiting for something to load, so let's wait for that to finish loading. Okay, it did work. So this is great. This is a nicer version of that question. So see, these are the suffixes we get in English, junior, senior, and so on. So maybe I am Jane Smith Jr. Now, I don't like this question. What is the address for Jane Smith Jr.? I'd rather have a question that says, what is your address? Or maybe even like, where do you live? And I'm thinking now that actually should go in this basic questions file, right? Just like our other question did. So it's available to everybody. Let's put it here so it's close to the same place. I'm actually not sure what's better. Where do you live and what is your address? What is your address? And I think we probably have to say something like, someone obviously could have more than one address. We have to kind of decide which address we want to ask them for with this question here. I think normally we want to ask them for the address. Put in the address that you want filled in on the court form next to your name. There are some forms where we don't need them to put in their address, that we were going to ask for their address a different way. So I think like a safe address for someone who's trying to get a protective order, for example. So we're going to take this question here about someone's address. We already have in here. No reason to rewrite it. I don't really know why that says x.name. I'm going to change this generic question too. That'll automatically say what is Jane Smith's name, what is Bob Landlord's name, address, not name. Let's go back to where we just were. Get rid of that extra field statement. So instead of X, of course, we want to have users 0. The way that we chose to use like plurals for all of these questions makes it a lot more complicated. It does make it a lot more flexible though. Here for state, I'm going to do something else as well, which is use the states list function that's built into Docassemble. I'll show you that here. So that actually is pretty nice because it will let you see subdivisions of other countries, not just the United States. And I want that to happen in the other version of that question too, since we're changing this file anyway. Let's make all the fixes at once, basically. All right. Now let's go and install that version of the package. These changes I'm making right now are available for you right away, which is kind of nice, I hope. You don't have to make these changes again if you are working on a new interview. They're available for everybody. But that's the kind of thing you want to think about, right? Like, which is the order of your questions. Do you want to ask about the plaintiff at the beginning or the end? Defendant at the beginning or the end? It can change depending on your interview. Depends on, so one thing that helps engender trust is if you don't ask someone to give you their name and address and phone number until they can see that the form is actually going to help them do what they want. Sometimes people just click something and start it. They don't know exactly what the form is, even if you have the best description of it. You want to let them actually run through it and see what it's doing first. Okay, so what we made a couple changes here. We wanted to say, what is your address? And we wanted it to say the state, give us a drop-down menu for the state. So let's see if those changes are there now. And we should default this to Massachusetts. Let me actually make that change too. No reason to make someone type in their state when almost everybody who uses this is going to live in Massachusetts. Of course, people can live in a neighboring state. Maybe if other states wanted to use this process, we could let that be a configuration option. But for now, we can just make it default MA. It's going to use the 2-letter state code. We want to do that to both versions of the question. The one that says, what is your address? And the one that says, generic person's address. Okay. Now, why not just reload that and see if that worked? I am forgetting the very first change we made that we wanted to reload this for. I don't think it was these address tweaks that we're doing, but let's go ahead and run through the interview and that will remind me. Oops. I clicked home by mistake. All right, we might have to rerun it, which is okay. Now, let's leave one unchecked and one checked, because what we should be doing automatically is leaving in a blank line for the fields that someone didn't provide us automatically. So that is not something built into Docassemble, it's something that we did. So I'm curious if that works. Okay. Okay, so perfect. We got the address. The state is defaulted to Massachusetts like we wanted. Let me refresh to let you see that. I might want those things on the same screen phone and email. Same screen, we ask for what their address is. See how now we have the possessive version of this? We probably want to make that optional. Same with the phone number and email. We might not know those things about the person. This should default to today. Let's make that change. This is kind of a tricky one, but you don't need to really mess around with that because it's going to be a built-in question. Okay, so I think we need to ask them about this. We don't want to just always be today, but we can use a function built into Docassemble, which is called today. And then we need to format it a certain way. So it expects it to be a 4-digit year. It doesn't seem to be searching in this box. I don't know why, which is okay. We can go to the documentation from here, which is a helpful thing to know when you're working in the playground. I thought we could. All right, I'm wrong. So see here where it says format equals. There are actually like 3 ways to do this. We can use the format date function around today. We could use today.format, or we could use today format equals. I kind of like the explicit thing about saying dot format. I believe that is correct, so I'm going to try that. So it's going to be YYY for year. This is a little trickier because, you know what, just temporarily, just to make this easier and faster to update, I'm going to just change it so we're always seeing the local version of that file. Because they are in the same folder, so I can do that. You won't necessarily be able to do that. And what did we do wrong? Oh, I don't need the dot. Nope, something's still wrong. Okay, I'm missing the closing bracket there. See, this is good. I didn't have to install it and wait for all that before I saw my mistake. Everything's looking green and happy, just temporarily. So this is a good thing to do when you're testing your interview. Let's move that to the beginning. So it's the very first question. Let's put signature date at the top. So I can just do save and run and confirm. So that did not work. So let's see. Might have to look at the example. Oh, I see. It's lowercase y's and d's, but uppercase m's. Kind of nice to have a function that does that formatting for you automatically, because defaulting a date to today is a pretty common task. Okay, perfect. So I can just click continue now without me having to type in something. And I probably want to adjust that so it says that we set the date to today by default. If you are signing today, you don't need to. Okay, I think people understand what the default is. Change it if it is being. I don't really know why it wouldn't be today. So I don't think we need to actually have more explanation there. But there could be some reasons. Someone's resubmitting something they already submitted. They go back in and edit the interview and they have to make changes, but they're not changing the date it was signed. I don't know right now what those would be. Even as I say that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it's always possible. Okay, so that worked. Now I'm going to go back and get rid of that. We had it 2 places, still at the end, which is good. You know what? I am kind of curious to figure out what was happening with that PDF form. Why those fields weren't being sent to us. So let me see if I can find that. Oh, I closed the window. So, all right. I kind of have a feeling it has to do with the way that the fields were labeled on the PDF. There's something called an export value for a checkbox. I'm opening it in the wrong thing. Okay, so you're seeing what I'm seeing. So it was these checkboxes right here that didn't work the way we wanted them to. The export value should be yes and no. And so that lets me change it. Okay, properties. So those are set to on, which maybe should be fine. Let's see if these are different. These ones worked. The other ones, these are export value. Yes. I think that's the problem. So let's change these so they have the right export value. This is like a weird thing I had to learn about PDFs. Basically, when it has that value in there, Docassemble knows to set it to yes or no. The easiest place to fix it and best place to fix it is in the PDF form. All right, so we fixed that. Great. Now we're going to re-upload that. And I have to hide that window. Okay, this is doing something weird to you guys. Sorry. Here we go. All right. I'm going to re-upload the form. So I'm going to go to my templates folder here. And simplest way is just to use this upload. Okay, so now I think those checkboxes should end up being checked on our final form. Let's see. So we're going to check all of them just so we can test that hypothesis. I want to just go through quickly to get to the end. I don't want to check those this time, doesn't matter. So it's still asking for the docket number, so which is fine. Okay, this time those boxes look checked, which is great. You're not going to be able to see this when it opens, I think. But you can see it in the preview. But yes, they're definitely checked. I kind of think we want to change the style of those as well, because they're a different style of checkbox, which is kind of weird. Instead of being square, let's make it the check, just like all the other ones. Now, that was a really quick change, but that's one of the options of the same screen where we set the export value. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Now this is not going to redo that form, but maybe if I go back and change it. Yeah, I don't think it will do unless I run it over all the way over from the beginning, which I don't want to do right now. Oh, it did. Okay, it worked. Great. So now it's showing checks. And it didn't force me to put in those things that I made optional, which is great as well. I just have to figure out why it's still showing that docket number, even though I thought we'd gotten rid of that. But this is a good place for us to stop right now. I will come back in and keep working on this form over the course of the day, but I'm going to stop the streaming.